Well, I must say I'd hoped for better.
Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, welcome back to my video game review series. So it just occurred to me while I was in the process of working on some retrospectives, that the 1 year anniversary of Hogwarts Legacy was coming up pretty soon. With that in mind, I decided to take a break from what I was currently working on, and make a quick video about the game, because I never bothered to when it first came out, despite saying that I was going to. When I sat down to play the game again, for the purpose of this video, I realised that this was going to have to be a long one. Because I have a lot to say about this game, and I want to make sure that I articulate my points to the best of my ability. Some of you might remember that prior to 2023, I mentioned that my most anticipated game of the year, and the one that I was personally most interested in, was Hogwarts Legacy. The reason for this, as many of you already know, is I have a bit of a soft spot for the Harry Potter series, particularly the video games. I grew up playing these games, and despite their negative reputation of being cheap movie tie-ins, I always personally enjoyed them. And as far as the early games in the series go, I personally believe in retrospect that they had significantly more depth, and were considerably more complex than they were initially given credit for on release. Prisoner of Azkaban, for example, is one of my personal favourites. I love that game. And I really think it worked as an open world RPG set in Hogwarts, with kind of a mini sandbox with plenty to do. It was a game that encouraged exploration and experimentation, and it genuinely felt like a solid action-adventure collectathon. So it's only natural that a modern day AAA game with that exact same concept, but on a much larger scale, with a significantly higher budget, and modern day graphics and technicalities, would pique my interest. Particularly when considering that it was going to be an original story, and not one that had to tie in with one of the books or movies. So Hogwarts Legacy is probably one of the only games in recent years that I had any genuine hype for. I got the game back when it came out last year, and fully intended to review it. It's now 1 year later exactly, and you can tell that that never happened. And yeah, I never even bothered to review it. Why is this? To be honest, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. It's hard to really explain why, because it's not as if the game is terrible or anything like that. I've played a lot of bloated, boring, repetitive modern day AAA games over the years, and as far as I'm concerned, this one isn't even close to being the worst. I mean, objectively speaking, the game is actually pretty good. The combat is fun and engaging, some of the missions are okay, the open world itself has plenty of side activities and quests to take part in. The game has a leveling up system, albeit a relatively simple one. It does have some mini-games and a bit of life simulation here and there. So what's the problem? For me, the problem is that in spite of all this, the game didn't even come close to reaching my expectations. The game came out in 2023, and by now, things like a large map, photorealistic graphics and character models, and Ubisoft-style sandbox gameplay doesn't impress me. And I couldn't shake the feeling that Hogwarts Legacy was far too similar and far too generic when compared to pretty much every game of its kind. For me, there was just something about the game that held it back. It failed to hold my interest for very long, and I just couldn't for the life of me get into it, and I think I've understood why. So the game is of course a third-person open-world RPG based on the Harry Potter series. More specifically, it's set about 100 years before it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe the game is canon. Because if truth be told, it feels nothing whatsoever like Harry Potter, at least in terms of its overall tone and writing. Right off the bat, the game gives you a terrible first impression. In my opinion, it has one of the absolute worst intros in any AAA game. The game has the exact same problem that a lot of modern RPGs have. Rather than join Hogwarts in your first year, start learning magic. Choose your own path, class, playstyle and all that good stuff. You instead start the game as a 5th year, who's a late addition to Hogwarts. And of course you already know some magic, and it's already established that you are some prophetic, all-powerful chosen one, whose destiny is detrimental to the fate of the wizarding world. I honestly shook my head with pure disappointment at the way the game was introduced. It's just so generic and by the book that I wouldn't be at all surprised if it were written by AI. It has all the cliches you could possibly think of, and if truth be told, it's just lame. So you meet up with one of your professors, get attacked by a bloody dragon, fight a bunch of charmed statues, and of course in true modern RPG fashion, find out that there's a secret, inherent magical power, and ability to see ancient magical traces and interact with them that only you, the player character, has, nobody else. Seriously, when are these game developers and writers going to realise that people who play RPGs don't want to be an unstoppable, special chosen one destined for greatness? No, we want to create our own character and do some role-playing. You know, the actual title of the genre, role-playing games. This honestly pissed me off when I started the game up. I can remember there being concepts for years across multiple gaming forums talking about the potential of an open world RPG based on the Harry Potter series. People would talk about a class system where you choose or even create your own style of combat, kind of like in Morrowind, where you had spell crafting, as well as an incredibly deep and complex approach to magic. Different schools of magic, each with their own spells and upgrade systems. A morality and karma based system like Knights of the Old Republic or Fallout. And a way to see your character grow and develop morally like the Fable games for example, where you determine your own path and your choices shape your own story and your own gameplay experience. A story that would explore a more morally and politically grey side of the Harry Potter series. Maybe make you ponder the ethical implications of the use of magic, or see things from the point of view of the opposing factions. Maybe let you join a cult of Death Eaters and become the Dark Lord, or join the light side and become a hero. A slow grind from being a pathetic, weak, underdeveloped first-year student to being the most powerful mage of all time, with the right amount of effort, or even a third option to play both sides against each other. And rather than rely on combat magic to make a name for yourself, instead use potions and occlumency, as well as illusions to take a more diplomatic approach to gameplay. There were so many ideas floating around the internet for years about what they could do with a game like this. But instead, after all these years of speculating, this is what we get. A boring, generic chosen one story with a copy and paste Ubisoft style open world. So for the rest of this video, I'm not going to sugarcoat things. No, I'm going to do my best to explain why in my personal opinion, and yes, that's all it is, my own personal opinion, Hogwarts Legacy is one of the most, if not the most, disappointing games of all time. Here we go. First of all, the character creator. This is without a shadow of a doubt the worst character creator I have seen in a AAA game from the past 10 years. There's barely any customization to it. You basically get a bunch of template faces that all pretty much look the same. And the face sculpting and customization the game does have just feels so limited. It's like this game came out on the PS2 or something, and character creation was a new concept. How is it that games like Saints Row, Dragon's Dogma, Fight Night and several others were able to make a complex character creator that allowed for extremely specific face and body shaping, but in this modern day AAA blockbuster game, you get a bunch of boring generic templates. You get 2 voices to choose from, and you can only slightly change the tone of each, which barely sounds any different. You can't customize size, height, body weight, nothing. There's no reason whatsoever to mess around with the character creator, to try to make an interesting and unique character, or even yourself. Such a wasted opportunity. It makes me wonder why they even added a character creator at all, because a well-written protagonist with an actual backstory and motivation would probably have suited this game more. So yeah, the character creator is lame and feels unfinished. The tutorial. This game really blows its load during the tutorial. As I mentioned before, it has you getting attacked by a dragon, clearly ripping off Skyrim's intro, then has you engaging in some forced, slow walking sections. You know how much I love those. You find out you're the special chosen one. You beat up some giant statues. Get used to that by the way, because pretty much every major story mission copies this. And then finally, after what feels like a boring, long interactive movie, you end up at Hogwarts and get quote unquote sorted into your house. That's another thing that pissed me off, the sorting ceremony. In a good RPG, you would be asked a series of moral or logistical questions to determine what your player's class should be. Or in the case of this game, what house you're in, since the game doesn't really have any player classes, sadly. Long story short, this game has no replay value whatsoever, but we'll get to that later. Instead, what you get here is a handful of pointless, inconsequential questions with 2 answers, and in my experience of playing through the intro multiple times, no matter what answers you choose, the game always suggests you join Hufflepuff. Thankfully you can reject this, because who in their right mind would ever want to join Hufflepuff? I mean, come on. Obviously I chose Slytherin, because why wouldn't I? Unfortunately though, this makes virtually no difference. I'm not kidding, no matter what house you join, it makes no difference whatsoever to the overall story or gameplay. If you were hoping to play this game as a villain, and do an evil playthrough, yeah, you can't. No matter what you choose, or what you do, the story is pretty much the same, minus maybe a few different cutscenes, and radiant lines of dialogue here and there, which are relatively inconsequential. One thing you'll notice right off the bat, that just perfectly sums up how lame the RPG elements in this game are, is the lack of overall NPC interaction.
Lumos. Protego. Lumos.
This game has the exact same problem that many open world games have, except on a much larger scale. The RPG elements are worse than any Ubisoft game that I've ever played, and believe me, man, that is saying something. Only a handful of NPCs in this game can actually be spoken to or interacted with, having a scripted conversation with them. But the vast majority of the students in Hogwarts are docile, with no AI whatsoever. I'm being serious, most of the NPCs in this game don't even have any AI programming at all. They're soulless, emotionless husks of data. Graphical assets just standing around, staring into space, and you can't do anything with them. They serve no function whatsoever. Literally nothing. How is it that Prisoner of Azkaban, which came out 20 years ago, was filled with NPCs? Every single one of them in that game was fully programmed, had radiant AI to an extent, and you could interact with all of them. Walk past them and they would turn to face you, look right at you and talk to you. They always had something to say. Cast a spell at them and they would react to it instantly, and would usually have something to say about it. Guys, I'm talking about a 6th generation movie license game from 2004. And that game had more interesting and sophisticated NPC interactions than this AAA blockbuster from 2023. In that game, as limited as it was, Hogwarts actually felt dynamic, it felt alive. There was a reason to explore the castle and try to find all the collectibles. Interacting with NPCs. As I mentioned before in this game, the NPCs might as well not even be there. It makes the game feel empty and soulless. I felt uncomfortable exploring the castle, since I felt so disconnected from everything else there. Speaking of the open world, with this being an open world game, you would assume that the vast majority of the game's runtime would be spent exploring the map, completing side quests and side activities, and generally role-playing. Well, unfortunately, I got about half an hour into this game before I realised that the open world, like a lot of modern day open world games, is probably the worst thing about it. For me, this game had the exact same problem that Red Dead Redemption 2 had, and that is that the open world is basically style over substance. Sure, the game is beautiful. The graphics and presentation are amazing, the character models are great for the most part, there's plenty of variety in terms of the visual aesthetics of the game's map, and at least unlike Red Dead Redemption 2, getting around the game didn't feel like as much of a chore, since the game has many fast travel points and you can get around even quicker by flying on your broomstick or a hippogriff. In fact, I actually found flying around to be a lot more practical than the fast travel points, since I would often get there quicker, but I digress. But for me, the game has the same problem that game has, in regards to how pointless and inconsequential everything in the open world feels. Exploring the castle, the grounds, Hogsmeade and the rest of the exterior locations of the game is fun for a while, but it won't take you long before you figure out that pretty much all the side activities suck. Pretty much all the loot in the game sucks, and you can easily complete the game without it, at least for the most part. And as for the side quests that you come across from speaking to the NPCs, at least the ones that the game lets you talk to, which isn't many, these are all basically fetch quests. Aside from the main story, pretty much everything in the game feels like busy work, and the rewards you get for doing these quests are so minuscule that it makes these side quests feel like a complete waste of time. Initially I did some of the side quests in order to level up my character, but then I realised that you actually level up considerably quicker by just defeating enemies around the grounds, which are incredibly easy to beat even at higher difficulties, and you get more than enough experience points and acquire good enough gear just by simply doing the main quests. Some of them are level locked, but you can get to that level very easy, as I mentioned, just by defeating enemies. It's so simple. Simply explore the grounds and you'll find enemies. Seriously, I would advise just ignoring most of the side quests in this game, because they are all so boring, and the rewards you get for doing them make practically no difference. Don't get me wrong, there are a couple of things you can do that enhance the overall role-playing experience. For example, you can customize the Room of Requirement, which kind of acts as your base of operations, and you can even raise animals, and even train some of them. I like petting animals and playing with them, since I'm an animal lover. It is what it is. I didn't mind that aspect of the game, and as I mentioned before, the game's combat is pretty good. It's nothing special, and it's nowhere near as complex or as deep as I was expecting it to be. It's way too simplistic for a modern AAA RPG, but despite this, it's still pretty fun. There are plenty of spells to learn and plenty of enemy variety. You can learn new spells by attending lessons, and as you progress in the story, you unlock more powerful versions of spells. Late in the game you can even unlock Avada Kedavra, the Killing Curse, but sadly this only works on generic enemies, and you can't use it on the Hufflepuffs. Believe me, I tried. But it basically breaks combat towards the end and makes it a piece of cake, and the combat was relatively easy even before then, at least if you have any video game sensibilities at all. Not all spells are combat related, of course. You can unlock useful spells such as spells to unlock doors and light up dark areas, or even turn you invisible. The game's stealth sections were quite fun, if a bit underused and a bit overly simplistic, but I don't have much of a problem with them. Some of these spells are even well implemented into the game's level design, showing that despite everything, the game had potential. This was something that made the older Harry Potter games so fun, solving fun and engaging puzzles throughout linear levels and using the spells unlocked during gameplay to progress through them. It's something that made these games intellectually stimulating and added some depth to the overall level design and gameplay. This game has elements of that, but not enough of them in my opinion. The game certainly could have done with some more unique and well-crafted levels, but I digress. All in all, combat is okay. It's definitely one of the game's strongest attributes. Sadly though, as good as the combat is, it's not really backed up with any real substance, because this game, in my opinion, is honestly a chore to get through. As I mentioned earlier, some of the levels are okay, and here and there some of the spells you unlock are well implemented into the level design, but clever ideas like this are few and far between. Most of the levels are just boring, and many of them seem to repeat. I lost count of the amount of times you had to enter a portal, explore a secret cave, and ultimately fight a bunch of giant statues. Even some of the boss battles in the game are just bigger versions of the enemies you've been fighting, so even the main quest starts to feel repetitive here and there. This brings me to something I alluded to earlier, and what honestly pissed me off the most about this game: the story. This game has one of the most generic, unoriginal, unimaginative and just flat out uninteresting stories I've ever come across in a game. And this would be fine if the gameplay was excellent across the board, but as I've already established, that isn't the case. The story of this game to me honestly felt like it was written by AI. The characters are all entirely forgettable, bland and boring. The dialogue is completely monotone the entire way through. I couldn't remember a single story moment or single line of dialogue anywhere in the game after my first playthrough. I was bored out of my mind the entire time. The story of the game to me felt very safe, very corporate, and as if it was doing everything it could to be as generic and as inoffensive as possible, like it was trying to appeal to everybody, while at the same time appealing to nobody. There is honestly nothing about the game's story that I found in any way interesting or memorable. The villains are all mustache-twirling, cartoonish idiots. You've got the evil goblin guy, who's evil because he's evil, and he does evil things, and ooh, look how evil he is, and he has an army of evil goblins, who are also evil, because reasons. What's his ideology? Why is he evil? What are his goals exactly? No idea. He's just evil because reasons. Lame. The human villains are the same, faceless goons with nothing to them. There's no moral ambiguity anywhere to be found. No branching paths within the story, or interesting choices to be made. Nothing whatsoever, even when the game does appear to give you a choice. It's really more of an illusion of choice. Again, Red Dead Redemption 2 had this exact same problem. Sure, you had a few minor binary decisions in the story, but none of them changed the gameplay or overall story whatsoever. Sometimes the game lets you be rude to certain characters during side quests, but this seems so pointless and out of character, since during the main quest, all the dialogue indicates that everyone likes the protagonist, and that the protagonist is a selfless hero. So hearing these rude lines of dialogue just breaks the immersion for me, because they really don't make sense.
Unless you want your classmates to know how you really feel about them, you might reward me for my time.
Oh, you're not at all who I thought you to be.
But you can't. It doesn't belong to you.
Finders keepers, Grace.
I can't believe this. Father's stupid oath just cost us a priceless family artifact.
So to sum the game up so far, the story sucks, the writing sucks, the RPG elements are as basic and undeveloped as you can get, feeling several generations out of date. The open world is dull and lifeless, filled with nothing but filler and boring side quests, as well as boring collectibles that don't really gain you anything other than experience points. Aside from that, there's no real reason to get them, to be honest. Unless you're a completionist like I am when I'm playing a game I actually like. And the combat is okay, easily the best part of the game, but nothing special. In short, this game feels like pretty much every modern AAA game released in recent years. So you'd have to say, taking all things into consideration, the game is mediocre at best. So why did it piss me off so much? Here's why. You know guys, I think I may have talked on here before about how sometimes, in my opinion, mediocrity is actually worse than failure. Let me do my best to give an example of what I'm talking about. I'm not sure if many of you guys will agree, but I'm sure some of you will. Imagine you're watching a bad movie, and I mean a really bad movie. Let's say an Uwe Boll film, or a Steven Seagal film. Those movies are objectively bad in pretty much every way. However, despite how objectively bad they are, they're still very entertaining. Those are the kinds of movies that you can watch and ironically enjoy due to the sheer absurdity of them. It makes them fun to watch, fun to review, fun to talk about, and most importantly, it makes them memorable. The common term used to describe this is so bad that it's good. Now let's imagine you're watching, say, a Marvel movie, like one of the Ant-Man movies or something. Those movies, in my opinion, have the exact opposite appeal. They're not exactly bad, at least not in terms of their overall objective qualities, but despite that, they come out and fade away into obscurity almost immediately. I mean, nobody ever talks about Ant-Man anymore, do they? Despite the movies getting generally favourable reviews on release. The reason for this is mediocrity. Those movies, rather than being bad, are simply mediocre. So mediocre in fact that you don't really feel anything when watching them, and you leave the theatre feeling as if you just wasted your time, and you never think or talk about those movies again. In short, Uwe Boll's movies are objectively bad, but bad in an interesting way. These copy and paste Marvel movies are mediocre in a bad way. Those movies are safe, mediocre, corporate products. They don't piss you off necessarily, but they basically make you feel nothing, because they're so bland, so safe, and so inoffensive, that there's really nothing to talk about once you're done with them. For me, this is the same problem with Hogwarts Legacy. I've played a lot of bad games over the years. For example, I played that crappy Sopranos game that I reviewed on the channel a while back. But despite how objectively bad that game is, it's fun to play ironically. You can have fun breaking the game down and laughing at the absolute absurdity of it. In a way, its flaws made the game more memorable. Hogwarts Legacy, on the other hand, simply feels like a soulless, corporate product made to appeal to the lowest common denominator. Gamers with absolutely zero standards whatsoever, who just want to follow the latest trend and gush over modern graphics, regardless of what the game actually has to offer. That's what honestly tore me up about Hogwarts Legacy, the sheer mediocrity of the whole thing. And the fact that the game got so many positive reviews on its release honestly let me know that the standard of video game journalism these days is at an all-time low. Gamers in general just have no standards for new releases anymore, and it's for that exact reason that I generally tend to stay away from modern games. This brings me to a particular topic that I've wanted to get off my chest for a while, and that is a common narrative that I often come across on this platform. I've mentioned before about how much of a fan I am of the early Harry Potter video games. Not so much the later movie tie-ins, those sucked. I'm referring specifically to the older ones. I still have fun with those games when I replay them all these years later. One comment that I'm expecting to receive on this video is something along the lines of, "You only like those games because of nostalgia." That's a comment I see all the time from kids trying to defend modern gaming. This idea that modern games are better than games have ever been, and that the only reason guys like me criticise them is because we have no nostalgic connection to them, and that the old games we like were objectively worse in every way, and we're just blinded by nostalgia basically. This is something I've alluded to before, but I've never really spoken about at length on the channel. What I really wanted to say about it is that that narrative is absolute BS, and I know this for a fact. I have a few ways to confirm this. If you look at my personal favourite games, for example, yeah, I did a top 100 list, link in description. My third favourite game of all time is Morrowind. I love that game, and I personally think it's a masterpiece. It comes in at number 3, after Spyro 3 and Hitman Blood Money, which are my 1 and 2 respectively. I've heard people say over the years that Morrowind is actually a terrible game, and that the only reason it's so beloved is due to nostalgia from people who grew up with it. Here's the problem with that theory though. I never played Morrowind as a kid. In fact, I first played the game in my early 20s, and that was some time after I'd already played Skyrim. Despite this, Morrowind became one of my personal favourite games of all time. Why? Because the game is a genuine masterpiece, and there hasn't been an RPG released since that could match it in terms of depth and complexity. It had nothing whatsoever to do with nostalgia. Nostalgia isn't the reason I enjoy the game's quality is. Likewise, I've recently been playing some old games for the first time. Half-Life 2 for example, I just reviewed. Completed it for the first time ever, and had a blast. I also recently played The Suffering, which is an old survival horror game. I really enjoyed that game, playing it for the first time recently. It's very underrated. And I even played the Punisher game from 2005. FYI, that's probably going to be my next review. Suffice it to say, that game is a masterpiece, very underrated. But I digress. So I'm playing all these old classics for the first time, and having an absolute blast with them. Some of them are even becoming my favourite games. What does any of this have to do with nostalgia? Nothing. The fact of the matter is that games in the past were genuinely fun, and were made specifically for the purpose of having fun, we're not blinded by nostalgia. We simply remember a time when games were actually fun to play and weren't all boring, bloated tech demos with AI written stories and bland, generic open worlds that are style over substance. Before I go any further, I want to go on a quick tangent here, because this is something I've wanted to get off my chest for a while. It's about the general state of video game criticism, and a disturbing trend that I've been noticing in the past few years. So another reason I didn't bother to review Hogwarts Legacy when it came out was the flat out dishonesty in regards to its overall critical consensus. And if truth be told, I didn't just want this channel to become a negative one with me complaining about the state of gaming journalism. I just wanted to review games. I noticed that mainstream critics, as well as general gamers, were actually praising this game for having certain attributes that previous Harry Potter games already had, as if the game did something new and original. I saw people gushing over the fact that you can ride your broomstick around Hogwarts. Guys, you can do that in the Chamber of Secrets on the PS2. That's not a new feature, it's literally the exact same thing, but critics were acting as if this had never been done before, and that it was some kind of amazing technological leap. You can ride a hippogriff, and yeah, what's the big deal? You could do that in Prisoner of Azkaban. And this is something that, as I mentioned before, is a disturbing trend with game criticism. These critics act as if these old games don't even exist. You guys might remember I talked about this briefly when I reviewed Jedi Fallen Order, which is another classic example of this. When that game came out, people were gushing over the fact that you could get in your ship and fly it between different planets in the game. You would basically choose a planet from the menu, and the ship would automatically fly there, basically as a cutscene. Critics were mesmerised by this, and were acting as if this was some kind of brand new, innovative feature. And I'm like, guys, you could do the exact same thing in Knights of the Old Republic, a game released 20 years ago. That's not a new feature. It's not even just Knights of the Old Republic. You could do that in Ratchet and Clank, an even older game. I'm talking about the original on the PS2. That's not even close to being a new feature. You could already do that in several games from the early 2000s. So why, when Fallen Order came out, was that such a big deal for critics? Again, it feels to me like they're lying to gamers, shilling for the gaming industry, and trying to excuse the boring state of modern games by pretending these features are some amazing technological accomplishment and that gamers should just consume the product and gush over it. In short, gamers nowadays have no standards whatsoever for these modern games. When Ratchet and Clank first came out, nobody was gushing over the fact you could fly your ship to different planets. No, that was merely a superficial aspect of the game. It wasn't a game changer. What people loved about that game was the gameplay, dynamic combat, the fantastic level design, enemy variety, fun and engaging minigames and challenges, and just generally how hectic and fun the game was the whole way through. It worked as both a third-person shooter and a platformer, with gadgets and weapons that were expertly implemented into the level design and plenty of replay value. Hogwarts Legacy is a shadow of this, with only bare-bones gameplay elements to speak of, mediocrity at its absolute worst. To be honest, I know I've gone on a bit of a tangent here, but Hogwarts Legacy only served to remind me what an absolute waste of time and energy modern gaming is, and why I should really just stick to retro games where I'm comfortable. And I honestly don't want to waste any more time talking about it. I mean, how do I even grade a game like Hogwarts Legacy? I give it a mediocre Ubisoft game out of 10. Yeah, I know it's not even an Ubisoft game, but you know what? It might as well be. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like since it really helps the channel, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one. Let me know what you guys think. Stay tuned for more retrospective video game reviews. Once again, I have a lot of reviews coming to the channel in the near future. Thanks for watching and God bless.
I confess myself disappointed.